Welcome to RPI's Tech Talk CloudSuite Series. My name is Keith Whalen, and I'm here to introduce today's presentation on v11 financials differences. Presenting today, we have Ms. Cindi Brackins and Mr. Chris Gordon, two veteran consultants who are very excited about all the power of CloudSuite financials and want to share everything they've learned from various implementations at our customers. If you enjoy these Tech Talks, please be aware that we host them every Friday at noon Eastern, and you can see the upcoming schedule on the Work Out Loud events page. Before I hand off, please know that we welcome questions. Just type them into the Q&A chat box. We're going to wait till the end of the presentation to not disrupt our presenters, and if we run out of time, we'll be sure to send you a follow-up. With that, I pass the virtual baton off to Cindi Brackins and Chris Gordon.
Excellent. Let's jump into it. We appreciate everybody joining today, Cindi and I will be spending some time over the next 30 or 45 minutes talking through not so much the differences of FSM, but what's worth noting. We've had a couple projects under our belt collectively, and we want to share some of those experiences with you and kind of show how the FSM system, the CloudSuite system, has improved functionality over version 10 and previous versions of Blossom. So with that, our schedule today, we're going to talk through how we can reimagine the global ledger, flexible reporting structures that are built in or that you can build within the Infor global ledger, hierarchies that will adapt to your organization's growth, fund accounting functionality, integrated AP invoice workflow, standard workflow events that come with the system that are pretty nifty. We'll talk through those later on today. Automated bank reconciliation and comprehensive audit logging throughout the system. That's where we're headed today. Let's take our first stop within the global ledger. So for the existing loss and clients in V10 or V9, you're familiar with the GL20 accounting units, your chart of accounts, and the old way of doing things is you had one structure. You had an accounting unit structure, and you assign that accounting unit structure to your GL company. You had one chart of accounts, and you assign that chart of accounts to your company. Maybe you had different chart of accounts for different companies, but essentially there's a one-to-one relationship there between your chart and your company. And maybe you're using the activity management module and you have projects built out, and you have a project structure. Maybe you have different activity groups with different structures, but for most of your projects, you might not have that same level of flexibility that you would in Project Ledger and CloudSuite, which we'll get into in a little bit. So what's changed? Well, those old concepts of accounting unit, account, sub-account, activity, project kind of gets blown away, and you can reimagine how you want that GL string to look. That all starts within your finance enterprise group and what you've defined as your dimensions for that finance enterprise group. You can see here this specific client used company, account, project, division, work order, and plant were the 6 dimensions or the 6 elements that they needed to track that was most important to their organization. So we build those out as their dimensions. And when you're moving from Blossom V10 to this global ledger and CloudSuite, you kind of have to take a step back and ask yourself, what matters to my organization? What are things that I'm having a hard time tracking in my current V9 or V10 system that I can now use as a dimension? What elements am I maybe tracking as attributes on transactions? And maybe that attribute should become part of your actual GL string. So these are all design decisions that are really important to have up front and will obviously impact all of your subsystems, because whatever you set up here, when you go open up a purchase order or requisition or an invoice, you're going to see that string. You're going to see company, account, project, division, work order, plan. Now you have a total of 14 dimensions, but Cindi and I have never seen anyone use all 14. So there's a little bit of a balance that you'd want to have in there. 6-ish, 7. I think you're starting to get a little too much with the 7, so maybe right around 5 or 6. But it really just depends on what you need to track. But just keep in mind that some of these dimensions are going to show up on every single transaction. So we set some as required, as you can see on the far right in the blue box. Out of the box, company and account are the 2 required fields. You can't change that. Every transaction needs a company and an account. But above and beyond that, any other dimension that you want to make required, you can. And we also identify the order in which those dimensions will show up on a transaction. You can see that by the order column. Okay, so it's really a shift in thinking from your standard GL20 or your standard version 10 finance code block to a new one. The second bullet we wanted to talk through are the concept of hierarchies and how these hierarchies can be established, but then also grow as your company grows and as your reporting requirements grow. So when we look at our chart of accounts, do you have different governing bodies that you need to report financials to differently? If so, maybe that's going to require separate, at least more than one chart. Do you want to see accounts roll up to summary accounts differently? Maybe in some internal reporting, this account rolls up to summary A, but in a separate report, that account rolls up to summary B. So now the global ledger can control and maintain all that, whereas maybe before you're using a third-party reporting tool to manage that type of structure. So now your global ledger becomes a source of truth for all of that, structure manipulation. Same thing with projects. Activity management is now called the project ledger, and each thing you build within project ledger is typically a project. Same concept applies there. You can have as many hierarchies as you need to structure your projects. Call center, same thing. So your GL20s that we were looking at before, there's now more than just one way to roll up all those posting and summary GL20 accounting units. You can build as many hierarchies as you need to show departments rolling up to different places to satisfy any type of reporting. I think we just have a couple examples here to visualize what we're talking about. This specific client had 3 different chart of accounts, a uniform system of accounts, an internal balance sheet and income statement, and also summary of earnings. And you build out your big library of accounts, and then you pick and choose what accounts go where within what chart. And this specific client had 3. You can see here the PUC chart looks a little bit different than the internal chart because they're reporting out differently based on who they're reporting to. Same concept with projects. We have a list of capital projects for this client. You can see on the top right all the project structures, the posting levels, the summary levels, how they roll up for this specific hierarchy. But then there's also a GNC, a grants and contracts project structure that that doesn't have all those projects. They wanted to segregate those out, and that's what they did using hierarchies. While there is a fair amount of time spent designing these up front, these different hierarchies, we approach these projects to train you on how to build these out, build them out for you when you go live, but then you have the tools to manage and maintain these going forward. So if things change and you need to build out another hierarchy, you have the tools to do that. And same thing with cost centers, just a different way of splitting out cost centers into different structures, different hierarchies. Okay, so we'll take a pause. We've talked through, reimagining the global ledger, defining different dimensions, different accounts, projects, divisions, what have you. Then we've talked about these different hierarchies, how we want to organize and structure those dimensions. Now the next thing on top of that is your reporting basis. The reporting basis allows you to consolidate all of that stuff, all those elements that we just talked about into a reporting package, more or less. And this structure, this screenshot we have here is meant to help you visualize that. So we have an internal reporting basis that is going to include our internal chart of accounts, a project structure that we've defined, a division structure called main, a work order structure, and a plant structure. And we've packaged all those different variables up, all those different elements up into a reporting basis, and then we use that reporting basis throughout the system, whether that's the account analysis form, just online analysis forms within the global ledger, or within Infor BI, we can also use those same reporting bases. Screenshot here of the account analysis, we pick that reporting basis, maybe click a time range, and then that will display the data in that specific format. Here's the chart of accounts at the bottom for the internal balance sheet, or sorry, for the internal reporting basis, and then all the activity and balances you can see broken out. It's also used in Infor BI. It's one of the first things you need to pick, a reporting basis. That's going to tell the system how to present all of those elements and dimensions to you, and then you're off and running to pick the report that you want to run and view. Okay, and with that, we'll turn it over to Cindi to talk through fund accounting and the new functionality within CloudSuite.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to discuss just a little bit some new functionality in CloudSuite. While there's a lot of new functionality in CloudSuite, fund accounting is more new than others. Recently came out April-ish, and they continue to enhance that offering as well. So there's continual updates to that. So what came out initially was, just the basic functionality, but Infor is continuing to improve that. For those who are not aware of what fund accounting is, we've got a definition on the screen that simply explains that it's an accounting system for recording resources whose use has been limited either by the donor, maybe by a grant authority, maybe by a governing agency, or even just some individuals, or by law. And what fund accounting does is it emphasizes accountability rather than profitability. And most frequently we see this used by nonprofit organizations, state and local governments, schools, and government-run utility companies. In prior versions of Infor, fund accounting was not a particular well-known offering. We could accomplish some of that fund accounting by using zones to help us keep some things in balance and that kind of stuff, but there was no real fund accounting functionality there. We ended up having to do a good bit of that kind of stuff outside of the system. We certainly would use the zones to help us do some fund accounting, but the I guess high-powered functionality was not there for fund accounting, and now this has been offered in CloudSuite now. I want to go to the next screen. Infor is working currently with early adopters on developing some of that functionality here. Fund accounting does come as a disabled feature for all new finance enterprise groups, so you have to make the selection to turn it on. And in order to use fund accounting, your fund has to be either in the accounting unit or your user dimension 1. I think we have some screen prints here that show you user dimension 1. If we develop our fund in that dimension, then we can use fund accounting, or we also can use the Infor provided accounting unit dimension as well. And you see the other print screen shows you where we have checked fund accounting as being applicable in this finance enterprise group. The next screen, I believe, is just an illustration of a payables released invoice example. Without fund accounting enabled, our entry in payables would look like the first entry where our payables would just all go into one place. It's not tracked by fund. You can see our expenses were going to fund 100 and 200, but our payables still resided all in one place. With fund accounting enabled, we now get to split that out by fund, and that way we can track that fund in a much better way and know what payables are related to which fund. The next screen is about cash code functionality. The cash code functionality is something that's a big win, I think, for Infor. And this one, we can see in each cash code, each fund's claim on cash. So I know that, in my example here, Fund 200 has 500,000 claim on cash. I can see they've committed 78,000 some change. There's only been posted of a 1995, and their available fund to spend is 419,000. This view into the fund cash code availability is a tremendous increase in functionality, because we had to do all of this really outside of the system in Excel or whatever other tool that you tried to use. So that's pretty new functionality that's coming from Infor. They've enhanced a good bit even since this initially was delivered, and they continue to enhance that functionality along the way. So it's pretty exciting for us finance geeks, I guess. I think I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
All right, thanks, Cindy. The next thing we want to touch on is the powerful integrated AP invoice workflow that comes with the CloudSuite payable system. So, there's obviously some setup that needs to be done to get the invoices routing to where they need to go. But once the setup's complete, that happens, right? There's IPA is the engine behind this. And once you have your routing category set up, your approval code set up, you can use the system and route invoices around to different people or teams for approval. And that's typically something that couldn't really happen in V10 unless you had APIA as a bolt-on system or application. But this all just comes with the system now. So it's it's a powerful workflow that's built within your payables module. And honestly, it doesn't take a lot of time to get set up. It probably takes more time to design where invoices need to go for approval than the actual setup piece. But always a fun conversation and design discussion to have with clients. Okay, a couple standard workflow events that I wanted to touch on. There's a lot that come with the system. I picked a few that I think are applicable to finance, whether that's in cash ledger or AP or GL. Kind of highlighted some of those here by the system codes. But basically, these are workflows that are built within the system that get initiated off of a certain event. For example, our request new vendor flow will automatically route a vendor request to a person or a team to approve that person's request for a vendor. So maybe a buyer is trying to fill out a purchase order and they're looking to select a vendor, and that vendor doesn't show up in their search. Instead of calling AP or emailing AP to say, hey, can you go set this vendor up? They can click a button that will launch a form, and that form has fields on it that will allow the buyer to fill out and click submit and route that request to whoever or whomever we set up to approve those, whether that's your AP manager or controller, whoever's managing AP vendor edition. We can build that out to go for approval, and all that's maintained within the system, right? Once the AP manager clicks approve, that vendor gets set up in AP. It's given a vendor number, and any details that the buyer put on, like vendor name or vendor class or terms or things like that, can come on and default onto the vendor record, so AP doesn't have to do that manually, or they can change what came over from the buyer. There's always that flexibility too. I have a couple screenshots here that just show what the out-of-the-box workflow looks like within your process server administration role. I think you can get to these and see how things are routing and what tasks or users need to be set up to make these work. There's also a request new invoice payment flow that we've used recently as check requests. It's a good form to replace maybe a manual or Excel-based check request process. You can deploy this form to whomever needs it and allow them to enter a check request and route that check request for any type of approval that it needs. Request new account. If a staff accountant wants to add a new account, but maybe they're not the ones that are supposed to put it into the system, the controller is the one that's supposed to do that. Someone could request that new account. It routes to the controller for approval, and then that gets put on your chart. Oops. Journal approval flow is also built within the system too. There's a flag on your finance enterprise group or on your GL company essentially to turn that on and set up approval codes to route journals for approval. Just like the request new vendor, there's the same thing on the AR side. If you want to request a new customer, there's a built-in workflow for that. Cash ledger transaction approval, if you're doing anything within cash ledger, whether it's a receipt or a deposit or just a general old CB20 transaction, there's the ability to turn this flow on and route that request or that transaction for approval before it's available for posting. The detailed payment void stop pay approval flow is one I'd like to point out too, because this is actually going to route a voided, if someone attempts to void a transaction, it's going to route the void to someone to approve. And we've had a client that really wanted to implement this because right before we had this discussion, one of their AP staff voided the wrong payment. And if this were to be enabled, that void would have went to the AP manager. AP manager could have said, no, that's not the right payment to void, reject it, and control, some inefficient work through this workflow event. So these come out of the box. Again, there's others than just these that we're pointing out, but these are some of the nice ones that I feel like apply mostly to the finance areas. Okay, we'll flip it back to Cindi for cash management.
Thank you, Chris. My favorite workflow is that journal approval piece. That was a long time in coming from Infor.
Yeah,
it sure has made a lot of people's lives easier, I think. I'm going to speak to the cash management bank reconciliation process. It's a new feature that's in CloudSuite, unless you had the landmark cash management application before. It gives you real-time visibility into your reconciliations. It allows you to do your bank reconciliation on a daily basis. And the advantage also is it helps organizations move from manual paper-based bank reconciliation to more accurate, more economical, and it's an automated process. It gives you a ton of functionality that you really never had before, in that we can create processing rules that perhaps you have bank fees that are coming in on your bank statement, and in the old world we had to just record those via a journal entry after we got the bank statement. We can create processing rules that we say, okay, based off of this payment identifier from the bank file, I can say, go ahead and record those bank fees for me, hit this account, and that automatically occurs for me. So no longer do I have to go and do a separate journal entry to record those. I can create many, many different processing rules. Another example might be you have a zero balance account and you need to record all those ins and outs of those accounts. You can set up processing rules to do that. So you can make your process so much more automated, and you don't really have to touch all of those details any longer. The slide that's showing now is really what the reconciliation process looks like. What happens is you get a bank file that comes in every day automatically. You can set it to automatically interface and import in based off of your processing rules and your reconciliation match rules. It will go in and, as I said, record your bank fees, if other kinds of items you can do with that processing as well. And it will match the bank statement to your actual transactions in the system and reconcile those for us. Example of a reconciliation match rule might be all of my AP payments are in a CHK payment transaction type. And I can make a rule that says, okay, go look at this check number, this date, and this amount, and match it to whatever the information comes in on the bank statement for that same transaction, and it will automatically reconcile those transactions for me. It's a little bit different than how we just used to reconcile our AP payments with a bank file that just said these were the ones that paid. This one combines that process in with a couple of other different tools that we can use to help us reconcile that bank statement. So the system tries to reconcile everything it can based off of the rules. There may be exceptions that it was not able to automatically reconcile. That's where you have to come in and manually reconcile some of those exceptions. Once that bank statement has been reconciled fully, you close the statement and move forward. There's also a dashboard that you can look at from the cash management perspective. A statement reconciliation dashboard. I think it's on the next slide, Chris. That will show you the status of each of your accounts, how many checks, deposits. There's just a good bit of information here that you can see on your statements in one view as you go down the different accounts. You also can bring in some, if you don't have bank files from all of your bank accounts, you can certainly upload those using the Spreadsheet Designer tool as well. So you don't really have to go to the extent of getting BAI2 files. There's about 4 different file formats that Infor will accept. We typically see BAI2 files as being the normal file that we typically will get, but you certainly can upload statements, maybe from a smaller bank, but there's just not that kind of volume. You may choose to upload those and still do that reconciliation in the system. Once you've done your daily bank statement reconciliation at month end, you would move over into the recon management world, and the information from the bank statement reconciliation would fold into that cash account reconciliation over in recon management. So there's a wealth of functionality here that can certainly streamline your bank reconciliation process. I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Thanks, Cindy. We're going to wrap up here with the comprehensive audit logging functionality within CloudSuite. There was some functionality in v10 and before to audit within the system, a couple of programs within AP, but it's far and away more comprehensive in CloudSuite. Everything you're doing is being logged, whether it's entering a transaction, changing a distribution line on an invoice, deleting a journal entry, adding a new customer, changing something on the customer. Every this screenshot here is there to serve to show that, you know, every date and time and down to the second, it's showing what's happened in the past and who did it. And then we can scroll off to the right. You see there's a whole lot of room over here to see all the fields on the project. That's what we're looking at here, is a project that have been changed, or maybe they stay the same. But you can see in the description, this is something that's changed. We put it in with one description, and then at a later point in time, updated that project description to something different. And you can get to these audit logs by going to Actions View Audit Log, or Actions View Full Audit Log. And whether you're on a record, like a configuration piece, or you're actually on a transaction data point or data element, you're going to get the same type of auditing. Just a couple of screenshots to show you what AP, the invoice distribution history auditing, looks like. This is its own form within the AP payable system, and it shows every time you've created or adjusted or changed a distribution within AP. You can click on one of these rows, and then off to the right-hand side, you can see in this case the status was released, and it's changed to a value of 9 of posted or journalized. Here's an invoice payment log within payables, and you can see that this specific invoice that we've highlighted on was paid, right? It had a check date of blank, and then it changed to April 30th, and we can see maybe a discount amount was taken and the total check amount. So the theme there is that everything is being tracked, and there's also some really nice reporting within each application that can get you more reportable. You know, export this to Excel, save it, rather than just an audit log, but very comprehensive there. And with that, we'll open it up for any questions.
Okay, great. So we have a few questions here. Let's dive into those. First question, we'll take an order in which it came. Can you change dimensions midstream? I'll interpret that question a couple different ways and hopefully give you an answer to that meets one of your interpretations here. You can add new dimensions to your finance enterprise group. You can change the name of whatever that dimension was originally, or you can add new records within that dimension. So if you have like department as a dimension, you can of course add new departments to that dimension. And you can also change the order in which those dimensions show up on your transaction string. There's a reorder function. So if you don't like the way you originally have it set up, you can go back and reorder. All right, the next question here is, if I heard correctly, dimensions can have multiple different subdimensions within them. For example, in version 10, different activity groups can have different number of levels between. Does this concept carry over to subdimensions? The answer there is yes. Basically, I think I'm interpreting your definition of subdimension as one of those hierarchies within a dimension. And you can have as many of those as you need, and those levels can go down as far as you need. So in V10 and before, you might have only had 5 levels in your activity group. You can now have as many levels, summaries, and postings as you need within your hierarchy.
Chris, just to add one little point to that, no longer is there such a thing as an activity group. it will become a summary level in your hierarchy. So you definitely can do exactly as Chris said. You can certainly have many, many different levels in many different activity groups or summary levels.
Perfect. Thank you, Cindy. Next question. Do all the IPA flows available keep the transaction in a unreleased status when the workflow is triggered until the approval is complete? In version 10, the delivered AP trigger occurs after the invoice is matched or released, making the reject disapproved action in workflow meaningless. So in CloudSuite here, when you release, you submit an invoice for approval. There's a button for submit for approval, and the status of that invoice changes to approval pending, and it'll stay in that status until someone either accepts or approves or rejects that invoice, and then it'll move into a release status if it's approved, or it'll be rejected. Okay. New AP vendor or customer can be routed for approval. What about changes to a vendor or customer record? Can IPA be routed to an approver or reviewer before the change is saved? That is a very coincidental question. I think, Cindy, didn't Sherry ask something very similar to the team earlier this week where they're using that request new vendor, but they wanted to be able to put changes on that too and route that through, but the standard flow doesn't do that per se.
Correct. Yeah, they would have to create a custom IPA flow to do that, and you definitely could route that to someone to approve before the change actually occurs in the system.
Right.
It's not delivered.
Yeah. Great ideas. I know we ran into it at a project that was going live this past weekend, and very good thoughts that you guys are having there. And I think over time that could turn into an enhancement request that Infor builds out some functionality alongside that form, or like Cindy said, we could always build or modify the existing flow to accommodate that type of requirement. Okay. Everything doesn't log in CSS. Some deleted items show in Rich Client. True. Yeah, there's a setting in Rich Client that you can show deleted items, and maybe that's not a setting or something you can see in CloudSuite. I guess I've only seen it from Rich Client, so that's a good point. Does the AP workflow allow to save all backup for the reviewer to see? The answer to that one is yes. Any documentation you upload to your invoice, attachments, what have you, even the invoice, if you have invoice imaging, that can route to the approver to view before he or she takes action. All that is saved in the system. Any comments or attachments you upload to an invoice will stay in Infor. And yeah, it saves that attachment in CloudSuite. So you can upload a file, a PDF, whatever, from your local machine to Infor, delete that file from your local machine, and you can still open it up from Infor CloudSuite. In activities in General Ledger, you cannot insert new levels between existing levels. Can you do that in version 11? You can. So the way in which you build out your hierarchies, right? You have your summaries and postings, but there's a move functionality that allows you to take any summary or posting level, and if you pick a summary level and you want to move it, you can say, do I want to include all my children within that summary and move it to a new place or not? So you have that flexibility. And then you can also just highlight a specific individual posting level department, accounting unit, whatever you want to call it, and move that anywhere within your structure. So yes, they can be reordered fairly easily within CloudSuite. Okay, that's all the questions I see, right, Cindy?
Yeah, that's all I see. Just as an additional item to that last one, you can certainly add new levels and that kind of stuff in your hierarchy. You also can create multiple hierarchies, so you may not have a need to modify that current existing one. You may just want to create a new hierarchy and build those levels in it as well. So you got quite a few options. I think that's the end of the questions.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. We hope y'all got a lot out of it, and reach out if you have questions. Reach out to me or Cindy or anyone here at RPI. I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you.